Okay, I think I'm live. This is a new experience for me too. I know it might sound strange if you know me, if you don't know me. Um, Today is really about explaining Bitcoin, and I'm doing this because a few friends of mine, they asked me, Constantin, you know a little bit, do you think now is a good time to buy? I have some requests from family too. Everyone thinks that I know something. So this is the first thing. The second thing is I think it's too important. The whole Bitcoin thing is too important to not get out there and help this whole thing grow. And you will realize that when you get into it, the why the network grows is because the people who use it are so aligned with it and they want to share it. And please excuse any ums or stuff like that. You know, I'm not a rhetor people, I'm not a politician, so this is also the first time for me, right? Okay, please keep this in mind. And I will record this whole video and I will cut it, and I hope the final result will be much better than the live stream itself. But I think a live stream is much more organic because, first of all, right, you can ask questions, I can answer them. I will, however, only answer questions at the end because I think I will answer a lot of questions during the video. And it would be counterproductive to break the video to answer your questions. And I think right now we have 4 or 5 people watching. That's not a lot. I was expecting a little bit more, like 10 or 20 people, but that's okay. Maybe some people will join later. But the most important thing is this video is out there and we're helping the network grow. Okay, let's dive right in. So let's check out 1 second. Right, I'm using this live streaming software for the first time too. I haven't rehearsed this whole video at all. It's basically a big mind dump, and let's see first of all if I can make this whole thing work. Okay, I think you're seeing the right screen. Perfect. Okay. Right, so a lot of people, first of all, they don't know what Bitcoin is, right? If you ask 100 people, 80 of them will say, yes, they've heard of it, but they don't know exactly what it's good for, right? Then there are 20 people who say it's a complete scam and everyone who's involved with this is a fraudster or only wants to sell courses or trading signals on WhatsApp and all this trash, right? So there's a lot of, also mainstream media is judging Bitcoin extremely, but in a negative way. For example, they all say Bitcoin is bad for the environment or it's slow and it will never be used. And this is false. And that's why I'm making this video, to clear it up, because most of the people who don't educate themselves, they have no idea. So it's up to people like me to, get the right information out there. Right? For example, look at this. The CEO of JP Morgan
is a hyped up fraud. It's a pet rock.
You're back to that?
Yeah,
really?
Of course, yeah.
So what do you make then of BlackRock and other firms that are investing in infrastructure?
No, that's different. Blockchain is a technology ledger system that we use to move information. We've used it to do overnight repo, intraday repo. We've used it to move money.
Right.
So that is a ledger. That's a technology ledger type of thing that we think will be deployable.
Remember, we've
been talking about that for 12 years too, and very little's been done.
There's some tokens that I agree with you on, but Bitcoin's based on a distributed ledger.
Yeah,
it has all the characteristics of a store of value. It's immutable, it's scarce, It
Totally untrue. It's
21 million.
Well, yeah, really. How do you know it's going to stop at 21 million?
Because it's
I've mentioned this to people.
Satoshi.
Everyone says that. Well, maybe it's going to get to 21 million, and Satoshi's picture is going to come.
Okay, right, that's enough. The video continues for 1 more minute, but you heard it from the man himself, one of the biggest and most powerful people in finance today, Jamie Dimon. And yes, you can listen to him. You can believe him. You can also believe people like Warren Buffett, who say Bitcoin is rat poison, or people like Bill Gates, who would short it if there is an easy way to do it, right? There are all these quotes. You can listen to Christine Lagarde from the ECB or Jerome Powell from the Fed. They all think Bitcoin is a scam. But if you think about it, right, these people, they're very smart. Do you really think they don't realize the potential? No, they realize it, but they have a vested interest in it not succeeding. Right, at the end of the day, for example, JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, he gets fees from his customers. That's his whole business model. And central bankers like Christine Lagarde and Jerome Powell, right, their whole livelihood depends on this whole system that we have right now not being disrupted. But that's what Bitcoin is doing. And Warren Buffett, right, he's the biggest shareholder in Visa. I mean, these people, in the mainstream media, they say Bitcoin is a scam, it's a fraud, but silently, secretly, they might know its potential, and the only thing they can do is say negative stuff about it. Okay, right, this is Bill Huang. He was one individual trader, and he lost more than 20 billion, right? Here you see 20 billion, but it was more than 20 billion with like bad bets, okay? And why am I showing you this? Because mainstream media, right, they're hyping up the whole FTX scandal right now. They're all saying, oh, crypto is a scam, Bitcoin is a scam because SPF defrauded thousands of individual investors and everyone lost money. I mean, I think it was like $10 billion that FTX lost in customer deposits or fraudulently invested. But FTX was nothing. I said it here. FTX was nothing. It's peanuts. $10 billion might sound like a lot, but it's nothing. Look at this guy, Bill Huang, right? One individual trader lost more than $20 billion. One guy. And do you know what? So he was short some stocks, right? But his bets didn't come up. And the people who underwrote his bets, right, was, for example, Credit Suisse. And you see the market cap of Credit Suisse, it's 12 billion. But I think they have like $1.4 trillion in assets under management. So you see the traditional players in traditional finance, they all say crypto is a scam, but meanwhile, they are scamming the people. JP Morgan, for example, they paid $30 billion in fines, only in fines. So that's 3 times FTX that they paid in fines. And you also know that the SEC, the financial regulator, right, everyone is bought there. The bankers and the politicians, they all own the SEC people. So the 30 billion that JP Morgan paid in fines was like nothing compared to what they really did. Okay, so why I'm telling you this? I want you to open your eyes. I want you to realize that not everything that they say is true. Okay, let's switch the conversation. Let's switch it to what's happening right now in the world. Right, you know from the media that in Paris the pension age went up by 2 years. So from age 62 to age 64. So everyone has to work 2 more years to enter the pension system. And you see like the people are rioting. They are furious, and rightly so. Okay, that's one story. The second story, Egypt. I don't know if you know it, but in Egypt, they debased the currency by 50% overnight. So basically, everyone was made poor overnight. I have met on Friday. I have met a Uber driver from Egypt. He recently moved to Vienna, and I spoke a little bit to him, and I asked him, okay, what's going on in Egypt? And he said he cannot afford basic groceries. Yeah. Right here is a video from Venezuela. This is
El banco, marico. ¿Cómo es posible esta mierda?
people are moving
Bien.
the paper.
El
in
banco
trash.
mandó a votar, ¿ah?
It's literally worthless. They can. I'm sorry that I say this like this, but they can wipe their ass. Right? It's cheaper to use money with the local currency to go to the toilet than to buy
Qué locura,
toilet paper. This is crazy. Here in Lebanon, the people who had savings in Lebanon, they are robbing their own banks with guns to get their own money out. Imagine this. You're a Lebanese guy or woman. You suddenly wake up and the bank says, oh, okay, your money is gone and you can't do anything about it. Of course, I would do it too. I would go to the bank, maybe with a gun, and say, give me my fucking money back. And that's what they're doing. How ridiculous is this? Right, in Greece, this is not recently, this is from 2015, but you all remember the financial crisis in Greece, or in Europe, right? People had to wait in line for days to get their money out. And look, they says, as Greek banks closed, following the disintegration of talks with the European Union, bank ATMs remained open, only to dole out a small amount of money, 60 euros a day per person. So let's say you have 50,000 euros in your bank, you saved your whole life, you're working day and night to save, and then suddenly they tell you can only take out 60 euros per day. But at the same time, inflation is making everything more expensive, right? So they're making you homeless. That's what they are making. And we're going to get to who's they, we're going to get there. Let's continue. Right, I have hundreds of tabs open, so that's why it's quite slow. I apologize for that. But look here, that was in February last year, I believe. And some protesters, farmers, they protested the vaccine mandate, right? They rightly didn't want to take the vaccine because, right, it's up to anyone to decide what they want to put in their body. It's freedom of choice. But the vaccine mandates in Canada, like farmers weren't allowed to enter, or truckers weren't allowed to enter the country if they didn't have it. And that their whole livelihood depended on that. So they rioted, they went to protest, rightly so, right, freedom of speech. But the Bank of Canada, they just froze their accounts. They couldn't access their money. And you know what? Protesters, right, they can fight against the police. If the police comes marching at them, they can fight against the police. They can stand there, they can make their stand. But if their whole bank account gets frozen and they can't access any money for their payments, right, for home, for energy, for anything, for groceries, right, then there's nothing they can do. And that's what big government can do. They can just freeze your accounts. In Russia now, this is a little bit more recent, right, the Russians, let's look at that.
Еще хоть как-то деньги выдает. А это все очередь.
Right, look at the lines. It's crazy.
Очередь в 2 ряда уже, правда.
I have a few Russian friends, and all of them say it was
А может и в 3 ряда уже.
Experience, like
Да ладно,
getting to notify that
походу сегодня тут
your money is
ничего.
becoming worthless.
Да.
So what do I want to tell you with these stories? I want to open your mind that governments have control over your life in a way they shouldn't have. But the things that you saw are only the beginning, and they are going to get worse. The central banks all around the world, the Bank of England, the ECB, Bank of Canada, Bank of China, the Federal Reserve, right? All the central banks in the world, they're all working on CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. And what they can do with that, it's programmable money. They can tell you how you have to spend your money. Yesterday, I met a friend and he basically told me, let's say you want to spend money on wine, the CBDC can say, no, you can't purchase your wine, or you can't purchase your tobacco, your alcohol, or, I mean, these are bad things, right? But for example, let's say the government has to print money and they give into the wallets, they send you the money, but they tell you you have to spend the money until the end of the week. And if you don't spend it, we take it away. We take it back. This is one thing. So the whole thing, right, is we're at the point in history where it's becoming more important than ever to understand Bitcoin and the freedom it brings. Right. I know I didn't want to talk about Bitcoin that much because I know that there's some stigma around it, and people, if they hear about Bitcoin, they all immediately think about bad things. And I wanted to focus on the problem it solves, but I have to tell you the properties of Bitcoin, short and precise. So when I continue with this video and when I continue with the story, you remember these properties and you make your own connection. I don't have to tell you why Bitcoin is a solution to all these problems, right? Because you will make your own connection to it. But you have to understand the properties, right? Okay, Bitcoin has 21 million coins. There will never be more. Satoshi, when he wrote his white paper, where it's open source, anyone can look at the code and can see there will only be 21 million. Okay, so the supply is fixed. What about the issuance of new Bitcoins? So Satoshi came up with this incredible thing that almost or approximately every 4 years, the supply of new Bitcoins decreases by half. So what is the supply, right? When a transaction on the Bitcoin network happens, it only happens when a block is mined, and the miners they have to expend energy, and it's costly to produce this block, and as a reward they get Bitcoins. But this supply reduces in half approximately every 4 years. Keep this in mind. The supply, it decreases with time. So in the beginning, it was 50 Bitcoins per block. Currently, it's 6.25 Bitcoin per block. At the next halving, which will happen in approximately 1.5 years, I think, maybe sooner, it will be 3.125 Bitcoin per block. And this will continue like this every 4 years. It will halve. Well, Bitcoin has a low stock to flow ratio. What do I mean? So when the Bitcoin price, when it increases in value, the miners, they cannot produce more of it. What do I mean by that? Let's take gold, for example, right? Gold also has to be mined. And when the price of gold increases, the miners of gold, they are more incentivized to produce more of it because, right, it's more valuable. Also, they can invest in more equipment to mine more gold. So the stock to flow ratio of gold is also low, but compared to Bitcoin, it's very high. So when the price of gold rises, the supply of new gold that comes into the market also increases. With Bitcoin, that's not the case. The supply of Bitcoin the price of Bitcoin has no impact on the supply. Bitcoin can be sent anywhere in the world nearly for free. What do I mean by that? If I'm in Brazil, I want to send 10,000 euros to Europe, I can do this with Bitcoin. And I will pay maybe $1 in transaction fees. And as you know, transaction fees are high. They're actually low, right? It's $1 for a $10,000 transaction fee. If I use the current fiat system and I want to send $10,000, first of all, it's going to take some days. I have to call maybe my bank and say, hey, look, I'm going to send 10,000 euros. I hope that's okay. And they will notice that and say yes. So the transaction goes through. I can use TransferWise, but then I pay 5% fees. So that's a lot more than $1. And you will say, okay, but what about small, ubiquitous like item purchases or transactions? Like you want to go to the grocery store and you want to buy a banana that costs $1. But then with Bitcoin, you have to pay $1 in transaction fees. You might think, okay, that's not going to work. But there's also a solution to that. It's called the Lightning Network. So I will not explain the Lightning Network now. I just want you to know that through the Bitcoin network, you can also buy small ticket items very cheap, like for free, basically. The network is secured by the hash rate. I will not explain technicalities now of the Bitcoin network. Just know that Bitcoin is extremely secure. No one can hack it, or it's practically impossible to hack it and create a fake transaction. Just know this. And Bitcoin requires energy to produce. You will, when we continue with this with the video, you'll see that throughout history we always had money that didn't require work to produce. It didn't require energy to produce, and that's bad. And you will soon know why that's bad. But with Bitcoin, that's not the case, right? Miners, they have to expand energy. They have to invest money and time and energy to create Bitcoins. So it requires energy to create. And last but not least, and also why we're here, right? We want to change the world, but we're here to make money. Price is determined by supply and demand. And the whole story that I'm going to share with you today, the more people realize this story, the higher the demand for Bitcoin will be. And now, what do you think will happen with the price when, right, you know now that the supply of Bitcoin decreases, supply decreases, but demand stays either constant or increases? What do you think will happen to the price over the future? It's simple economics. Okay, let's continue. One second. I will just check if this live stream is actually working. Okay, I think it's working. Otherwise, I would have talked now for 20 minutes already, and no one would have seen it. Well, let's see. 1 second. Okay. Again, I'm new to live streaming, so I need to know if you're seeing the right things. I experienced live streamer, he can switch around effortlessly, but I need to play a little bit. I'm sorry for that. Okay, now I think you should see the right thing. Yes. Okay. Right, I just gave you a very quick overview of the properties of Bitcoin. And please, while I talk about the story now, please keep these properties in mind in the back of your head. All right. What you're seeing here on the screen are agri-beads. Agri-beads were used in ancient Africa as money. And this, it's glass. This is glass, right? People in Africa, they use that as money. They use that to transact. They use that to purchase groceries, to transact for services and anything. And why? Because these glass beads, they were hard to produce, right? It took energy to create these beads, and time and effort. Yeah, they could also use seashells, for example, right? And you probably know by now that throughout history, anything was money at one point. Fish was money, like people were trading fishes. Seashells were used as money. Stones were used as money. Okay, a lot of stuff was used as money. But now here in 15th century Africa, ancient Africa, they used these glass beads as money. It was scarce, right? Not everyone could create these. You need to have knowledge to create these glass beads. They could survive a long time period. These glass beads, they couldn't be destroyed by time alone, right? So over 100 years, you would still have your glass beads. And so this was good, and for a time it was good, but in 16th century, European travelers, they came to the shores of Africa, and they quickly found out that the local kingdoms there, they were trading with these glass beads. They were using these glass beads as money, and they figured out, I'm now a European traveler, a colonizer that goes there. And they said, wait a minute, they're using these glass things as money. We in Europe, we can produce these at no cost, right? We have superior glassmaking technology. We can create these at pretty much no cost at all. What about we create these glass beads in Europe? Then we transport them to Africa, and we can buy up all the lands and all the services and all the kingdoms. And that's exactly what they did. The European travelers, they went to Africa, they used cheaply produced agri-beads, and basically they bought the people. They bought slaves. And most people don't know this, but the reason why slave trade was possible is because of these agri-beads, because of cheaply produced money. And the Africans, they didn't know that, so they just accepted the agri-beads. And inflation doesn't happen overnight, but slowly over decades, the people were made homeless, and people were made slaves. And the most perverse thing of the whole story is that the European colonizers, right, they purchased the slaves with agri-beads, with glass beads, and then they transported the slaves to the glass-making facilities. So the slaves, they created their own demise. They were working in the glass facilities and made their own worthless money that the colonizers used to purchase more slaves. And you know how it turned out, right? Look at this. It's horrible. Like, you cannot even imagine it. Millions of people were bought like this, put into ships. Like, half of the people died in the ships. And then they were transported to Europe, to America, to South America. And this is horrible. This whole story with the glass beads and Europeans creating easy money, please also keep this in mind. We'll come back to it. Okay. And because, right, glass beads could be produced cheaply by one society that the other society couldn't produce cheaply, this happened with many commodities throughout history, and that's why gold was used as money by most societies throughout time, because gold couldn't be produced cheaply. You couldn't create gold out of thin air, or you couldn't fake it. So that's why gold was used as money, and people trusted in it. For example, let's take a look here. This is a gold coin, the aureus coin, that was used in Rome. The Roman Empire used that. And it was actually Julius Caesar who created that coin. And he was not the first one to create gold coins. Like a lot of civilizations, they used gold coins. But let's talk a little bit about his gold coin. He basically said, I will issue gold coins with my name, with my trust, and each gold coin had 8 grams of gold. And the whole Roman Empire, they could trust that. They could trust Julius Caesar, that his gold coins were fair and had 8 grams of gold. But what happened, right? Julius Caesar died. Some other emperors took over. The empire expanded. And when the Emperor Nero, the infamous Emperor Nero, finally came, he inherited an empire that couldn't conquer new lands anymore. So he had to find new ways to finance the empire. And his bright invention, what he called it, was inflation, to reduce the gold amount in the coins. So Nero was the first emperor who started with coin clipping. That's what historians call it, coin clipping. He reduced the gold content from 8 grams to 7.2 grams. And pretty much, you can look it up, pretty much every emperor after Nero reduced the amount of gold in the coins. And you all know, if you paid attention in history, what happened to the Roman Empire. It collapsed. There was corruption everywhere. The lands couldn't be conquered anymore. And the empire split in half, right? There was the new Eastern Roman Empire under Constantin the Great. I like that name. And he was the first to create a new currency, a completely new currency. It wasn't the aureus anymore, the Roman aureus. He created a new currency called the solidus. And Constantine, he said, basically written in stone, the principles of the solidus, that it should have 4.5 grams of gold per coin. And as you know also from history, the Byzantine Empire, it lasted for 1,000 years. Because the solidus didn't, it kept its value. They didn't reduce the gold amount in the coins. But after 1,000 years, right, there came another emperor who said, okay, I cannot finance my whole economy anymore. And the way to finance it is through inflation, through reducing the gold content. And then the Byzantine Empire failed. That's pretty much consensus of historians, that the currency was the first impact of the collapse of the empire. So over time, right, new empires came up, and we had the Renaissance and all that. And there was a new invention, and that was banking. And yes, banking is an invention. And the Rothschilds and the Medicis, for example, right? The Rothschilds were later, but the Medicis were one of the first in Florence, were one of the first to come up with this banking invention. And it was an invention because what was the problem that they tried to solve? Gold, right? It's physical, so it's hard to carry around. And in the medieval times, for example, when you wanted to send money or gold from, let's say, Paris to Florence, you had to go by horse. And that was dangerous because there were thieves everywhere and robberies. And you know the stories of Robin Hood, right? People robbed these money trains, not trains, but you know what I want to say. And so the Medicis were one of the first to come up with the invention of a bank, to say, okay, people, listen, you can store your gold at my vault. It's 1 meter thick steel vault where no one can get in. It's impenetrable. And because of our reputable name, you can trust us that your gold is safe. And that banking innovation was so great, and it was great. It was fantastic for productivity gains. Like the economies after the invention of banking, they all increased in all over Europe. And now, instead of sending physical gold from, let's say, Paris to Florence, you could go to your bank branch. You could go to the Medici bank branch in Paris. You could deposit your gold coins and can say, look, I want to pay my supplier of spices in Florence. Here are the gold coins. And the banks, they didn't have to physically transport the gold all the way to Florence. They just made a ledger entry, like in a list. They wrote down, okay, Constantin deposited 50 gold coins, and they sent that ledger entry, then on a piece of paper to Florence. And in Florence, they would then get that out again. So the ledger entry, and the supplier who wanted the payment, who wanted the gold, he could go to the bank branch in Florence and say, look, I have this contract, can you please pay me out? And that revolutionized the whole finance of the world, of the Renaissance, and there was a lot of productivity. But there was one big major issue, and that's greed. Humans are greedy, and bankers, they're greedy, and more often than not, these banks, they didn't have enough gold to pay out everyone who said he deposited that gold. But that's another story. The story of bank runs is also very interesting. But let's continue now with the story. Okay, so the Medicis, right, one of the biggest banking clans, most powerful banking clans in history, they were the innovators of banking. What was the second big invention? Okay. What was the second big invention? Sorry for the lag now here. It's again because I have so many tabs open. Okay, it's still loading. Right, wait, let's close this. The second, I will just continue talking. The second big invention was the Gutenberg press, right? For the first time in history, we could create paper with cheap cost. We could print on a cheaply basis, and banks, they came up with the invention to say, okay, instead of using coins, gold coins, silver coins to transact, we can just take the gold into our vaults and we can issue paper currency, paper notes to the people, and the people can then use the paper to transact. And that was nice, you know, because people they couldn't get robbed anymore. It was just paper basically, right? It was much easier to carry around. It was easier divisible because on a piece of paper you can write any value you want. So this again created a new revolution in productivity in all over Europe. And here you can see in 1661 the first banknote was created in Europe. And who was that first banknote? It was the Swedish Riksbank. It was the first central bank. And the guy who came up with that invention of banknotes, right? It's debated actually who was the first one to create banknotes, because in China they were using banknotes already for thousands of years. But now in Europe, I mean. Okay, this is someone else. There was a guy called Johann Palmstroh. He was an economist. He was the first to come up with the concept of the central bank. This is what I just explained now, right? The central bank takes all the gold in and issues paper currency for the people to transact with. Okay, that was in 1661. What do you think happened in 1663? 2 years later. the whole Swedish economy collapsed. Because, of course, the Swedish Riksbank created more banknotes than they had actual gold in their vault. And the people were made poor because you saved in paper currency and you had your gold confiscated at the bank and you couldn't do anything about it. You were just shot dead if you revolted. So Johan Palmstorch made everyone poor in Sweden. That was the first instance of central bank. And he tried again, actually, with a second instance of the Swedish Riksbank, and it did the same thing. This here is John Law. He came after like 20 years, or not 20 years, I'm sorry, like 100 years after Johan Palmstorch. He was a Scot. He was also an economist, and he was very well politically connected. And at the time, right, like around 1671, he was invited by the French ruler at the time, because France at that time, it was devastated economically by the 100 Years' War. And so the king, he invited John Law, this Scottish economist, to come up with an idea to bring the economy back on track. That was the king's proposal. And John Law, as smart as he was, and with the inspiration of Johan Palmstorch and the Swedish Riksbank, he said, all right, let's create a central bank. Let's take the gold from the population and let's issue banknotes. Let's issue paper currency for the people to transact. And he basically said, dear French people, here's this new central bank. We're creating this currency and it's backed by land in the Americas near the Mississippi River. So the people, they got their paper currency and they trusted it, right? Because it was backed by land in Mississippi, in the United States, or in Americas. It wasn't the United States back then. So people were happy for a time, like 2-3 years, people were happy. They were saying, okay, we have new money and this economy is growing. But suddenly a few French people, smart French people, they realized something. They realized that they could go to Mississippi, to the Americas. They could purchase land for nothing, because no one was living there, right? They could just own it, right? And then they could go back to France and they could sell that land to France. And now suddenly there was a market price on the land of Mississippi. And John Law had suddenly a problem because he said his banknotes were backed by land that was worth X amount, but suddenly people were selling that land for much less. So people were starting to see that the paper currency wasn't worth what he said it was worth. What did John Law do? He went to the people who sold the land in the Mississippi River and he purchased it expensively from them. But he didn't have gold, right? Real money to purchase that. So what did he do? He just created more paper currency. He just printed that and paid out the smart traders. But that worked for like half a year and then the whole economy crashed. France was obliterated. Everyone was poor again. The same would happen in Sweden. The banknotes were worthless and the whole economy for like 20 years collapsed and people died of hunger and starvation. It was horrible. And that's all thanks to the great John Law. And yeah, and after John Law and after the collapse of the French economy at the time, all over Europe, the same smart people that were politically connected, they all created their own central banks at each country. So the Bank of England was created at that time. The Habsburg Empire, they created the Wiener, I don't know the name now, Wiener Staatsbank, well, that's what it's called, I think. The Bank of Scotland, like pretty much all the empires in Europe, they created their own central banks, and they all did the same thing. they all did the same thing. They just printed everyone into poorness, into oblivion. And who profited from that? Because of course people profited from that. Those were the people who first received the banknotes that could buy assets with that. Those were the people who profited from that. The people who used the money, they were the ones who were killed. So this history of central banking is a history of fraud. It's a history of taking advantage of the fact that you can push a button and create money. You can create easy money. And gold, right? You cannot create gold out of thin air. You cannot push a button or open the printing press and create more gold. That's not possible. That's only possible with paper money and with banknotes. Let's enter the 20th century. We're getting close to what's happening now, which is exactly the same what happened now with the things I showed you. But 1 second, this is loading again. Okay, so after the collapse in central banks all over Europe, the people finally agreed that central banks need to get their act together and they need to create a currency that's backed by gold, because gold at the time was the only money that's scarce, that's divisible, that's immutable, that cannot be faked. So the people said, dear central banks, please use a gold standard. Because if you don't use a gold standard, if you don't have your reserves one-to-one, if you issue more banknotes than you have in reserves, then we're not going to trust you, we're not going to back you. And the French Revolution and the revolutions also in Preußen, they were all because of money too. Okay, let's enter the 20th century. We have a gold standard in the world now. So most economies in the world, they are using paper currency as a transaction method, as a way of paying things, but the central banks had enough gold to back these promises up. In 1910, in the United States, there was a secret meeting. And look, people, this is not a conspiracy. This is real history, okay? So in 1910, a group of the most powerful people in the United States at the time, from banking, from manufacturing, from politics, they gathered in a secret meeting in Jekyll Island. You can see here in this picture who were the people: Warburg, House, Wilson, Aldrich, Morgan, Vanderbilt, Schiff, Rockefeller, like the big guys, the people who controlled the economy at that time. And they met in this meeting and they discussed what's now known as the Federal Reserve System. And they had the idea that, because before that in the United States, each state had their own federal bank, so their own little mini central bank, where each state used maybe their own currency even, but it was used from the different banks. So they got together and they said, we need to create a federal banking system. The state level banks, they should remove their power. We're gonna remove the power and we're gonna put everyone together in one big central bank, the Federal Reserve. And that's what they discussed in this secret meeting. How do we know now that it's secret? Historians found out secret transcripts. Because otherwise a secret meeting is not a secret meeting, right? But now we know that they met and they discussed the Federal Reserve System. So that was in 1910. And in 1913, 3 years later, the Federal Reserve System was enacted. So it was made publicly. And what happened? There was for example, executive order from the president in 1933, that's 15 years later, that everyone has to put their gold into the system. Like, you cannot own gold anymore. Right, the dollar, sorry, I have to get my thoughts together now. So before the Federal Reserve System, people were using like mini dollars from each individual bank, but they could go to the bank branch and they could redeem those paper currencies for gold at any time. So the dollar, for example, was printed on it was printed redeemable for gold. So you could transact, but anytime you wanted to get your gold, you could just go to the bank and say, give me the gold, and they would give it to you. And that was fine. But after the Federal Reserve enactment, that was not the case. You couldn't redeem your gold anymore. And that escalated until 1933. That was at the height of the Depression. People were made to hand over their gold to the federal government. And instead, they received dollars in return. And these dollars, let's go back. Let's say you have 100 ounces of gold, which is a lot. But let's say you have 100 ounces of gold. With these 100 ounces of gold, you could buy a certain amount of goods and services in the open free market. After this executive order, right, when you had to give your gold to the government, they only gave you 30% of your real gold's worth in dollars. So you lost 70% of your purchasing power overnight. And there was nothing you could do, right? Look at this. Criminal penalties for violation of executive order, $10,000 fine or 10 years imprisonment. So the government, they wanted the gold, okay? They are greedy, they wanted it. Let's move forward. And so the Federal Reserve System in the United States was enacted. And what happened in Europe, right? We had France, we had the Weimar, the Germans, and they also had their central banks that were running on the gold standard. But in the First World War, the countries, they didn't have enough gold to fund the war. The Germans, for example, they only had, here on the screen you're seeing Nazis, but I'm talking now about the First World War, okay? So the Weimar Republic, they had to print, they had to hyperinflate the currency to fund the war effort. And later, when they lost the war and France demanded their reparations, or the Allies demanded their reparations, they had to inflate even more. And that's what also led, because everyone was poor, right? That's also what led to the Second World War. But you have to remember that one second, guys. I'm gathering my thoughts again to make the connection from the First World War to the Second World War. Whatever. Basically, the governments in Europe hyperinflated their currencies. And in the Second World War, this is what you're seeing here, the Nazis, they tried to flood Europe with fake British banknotes. So it's even a war tactic to create fake currency of your enemy and to drop that currency and to hyperinflate their economy to reduce the economy to ashes. That's a real war tactic that the Germans, for example, used. And others used that too. Whatever. The Germans lost for the second time, and thank God. And the Americans, as the big winner, they were the only ones who had a working economy in the whole world. They gathered in Bretton Woods, which is a hotel in New Hampshire, or it's like a place in New Hampshire in the United States, and they invited delegates from all the countries from the allied countries, right? Delegates from the allied countries, they invited them to this place to discuss a new global monetary order, a new world order, because they were the winners and they wanted to reap the rewards, rightfully so. So they invited everyone and they discussed, okay, what can we do? And they invited many different opinion leaders from all over the world who had different economic theories, but one of them was Keynes. And Keynes was a British, well-connected man. Yeah, you heard that again now. We had that same well-connected political thing already many times in history. Whatever. Keynes was well politically connected, and his economic theory was to create a global central bank, one central bank for the whole world that issues one currency, and everyone in the world had to use that one currency, and that was the US dollar. And that would give extreme power to the United States, because remember, the United States, they could print the dollar and everyone was forced to use the dollar, so that gave them an extreme advantage. At the end of this New Hampshire Bretton Woods meeting, that was enacted. The Federal Reserve and the US dollar pretty much became the world central bank and the world reserve currency. Everyone had to use it. And one thing you have to know too is that every country had to deliver their gold physically to the United States. So you had to, for example, France, they had to give their gold to the United States to use the dollar. They were forced to use the dollar. And you will soon see how the United States abuses that power. Right here you can see again a picture of the delegates from all the countries, Panama, I can't read the other names. And actually most of the countries, they said no to this proposal, but Keynes and the United States delegates, they just basically said, we don't care. Like literally, this is the offer, you have to take it or die. So everyone had to do it. Okay, this Federal Reserve system, it lasted, this global monetary system lasted until 1971 in the form as it was created in the Bretton Woods meeting. After 1971, which you will see shortly, it's a new kind of global system. Because remember, the countries, they had to deliver their gold to the United States. So the US dollar at that time was backed by gold. And the governments trusted the US government that they wouldn't print. But listen to Richard Nixon, the president, and who said what he said in 1971. I hope YouTube will not play an ad.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States. In full cooperation with the International Monetary Fund and those who trade with us, we will press for the necessary reforms to set up an urgently needed new international monetary system.
Basically, the United States, they said, fuck you all, you cannot take your gold out, and you have to use the US dollar, and we're gonna print it out of existence. That's what Richard Nixon said. And and you know what happened in 1971 with the inflation. The inflation peaked, it went to the moon. And the countries, they didn't like that. For example, France, they sent a little warship to New York to get their gold back. And Switzerland demanded their gold back. The Germans demanded their gold back. Great Britain demanded their gold back. All the countries demanded their gold back. And the United States, they agreed a little bit, to give them a little bit, but they pretty much said, look guys, we can't give you the gold anymore. Why? Because the government in the United States, they ran a huge deficit in the Vietnam War. They just couldn't, they didn't have the money anymore. The only way out of their deficit was to print more money. And when the other governments around the world realized that the US government is just printing dollars to fund their war effort in Vietnam or in Korea, they said, okay, it's time to get out. And they tried, but they didn't succeed. And the United States, they suddenly had a huge problem because the value of the dollar plummeted. And a plummeting US dollar might be good for US exports, but it's not good for Americans because their wealth is being eroded relative to other countries' wealth. And the United States, they had to come up with a new demand for the US dollar. And what was that new demand? It was the oil, the petrol. And the Saudis at the time were no one. They lived in tents, they were nomads, but Standard Oil, the American company, they went to Saudi Arabia. They, as you can see here from this picture, they gave the Saudis a concession to make oil. They funded the facilities to produce the oil, to export the oil. They also invented the necessary cargo transport ships to whatever. The United States, they basically gave all the capabilities to the Saudis because they had all these oil reserves. But under one condition, they said that the Saudis have to sell their oil for dollars. And that was a way to create new demand for the US dollar, because suddenly all the countries in the world to get oil, they first had to purchase dollars so they could purchase oil. And then suddenly there was new demand for the dollar, and the dollar was saved pretty much. And that's how the petrodollar system was created. And that's what we're seeing right now. We're living in a petrodollar system, in a fiat system, where the US dollar controls the money, the US government controls the money supply from, and the economic growth from any country pretty much. But we're seeing that slowly eroding away. Okay, let's go back again. So that was a brief history of money and how we came to our current system. So we're having in Europe, for example, the euro. And the euro is the same thing as the US dollar. Okay, this chart is not loading. Let's continue with this chart. I'm doing something. I'm actually not looking at the live stream itself. Again, I'm hoping it works, that you're hearing me. Also, I need to get my thoughts together again on the next chapter, because we now discussed basically the history of money and the history of central banking. And as you can see, right, the history of central banking is one of corruption, where the people who are in power, they abuse that power because they can. And the US government is abusing that power right now. And the ECB is abusing that power right now. And Erdogan is abusing that power right now in Turkey. And anywhere in the world, you can see that in Hungary, anywhere, governments who have the control over the money supply, they abuse that power. And what does this create? This creates a fiat system. What is a fiat system? Fiat is Latin for decree. We use fiat currency. We use decreed money. People say behind Bitcoin there stands nothing and no one is backing it. And in fiat currencies, governments are backing it. And we use it because we trust the government. But is it really trust? Are we using the currency because we're trusting the money? Or is it just because it's decreed? I think it's because it's decreed. There is no free market for money. I can't just go and say, hey, look, this is the Constantin money and you can use that money. No, I will go to jail. I also have to pay my taxes in the euro. And that's what a fiat system is. The governments, they decree to you that you have to use that money, and if you don't do it, you go to jail. That wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't for their printing. And as you can see here from this chart, for example, the US dollar, they print the value of the US dollar into non-existence, right? $100 in 13, right, when the Federal Reserve was founded, it's now worth $2. You lost 98% of your purchasing power. And basically, right, this is bad. This is bad news. This is bad news for savers. The same thing, look, listen, I am half Brazilian. I have family in Brazil. And you probably never lived through extreme inflation. I never lived through extreme inflation. But my grandparents in Brazil, they had to live through extreme inflation many times. The currency in Brazil, it changed many times. And every time the government just printed the money and created inflation and everyone was made poor. And in Argentina, for example, you have it right now. You have 80% inflation in Argentina. The currency is becoming worthless. You cannot trade. You cannot purchase goods in Argentina anymore. And what does this whole inflation thing do? It creates a system where people are not inclined to save. What do I mean by that? When you have a currency, when you're using a currency and you know that it's getting debased by 2% a year, then why should you save money? It's better to spend that money on new plastic clothes from Zara, or spend your money on a new car, or go into debt to buy stuff, right? People are not saving money anymore because they know that the money is just being worth less and less over time. And this creates a huge societal problem. First of all, let's check out here. First of all, you have to work more and more to purchase the same goods. You have to invest more time to purchase the same goods. Look at this, 1970, 1 year before Richard Nixon changed the convertibility of the US dollar to gold. A new house costed, the average new house costed $23,000. Average income was $9,400. A new car was $3,450. Right, you see the ratio here. It's like 3 years. Or no, you could buy basically 3 cars with a average income if you could save 100%, but you couldn't save 100%, so it was more like 3 or 4 years for a new car. Same with the house. Yes, the quality of the houses back then was lower, and now we have more better quality of houses, but still, it should the quality of the houses, right, increases with the productivity. So the relationship between the income to the price of the good that you want to purchase should increase the same way. You see the same thing with like movie tickets, gasoline, and all that stuff. What about 2017? And I didn't find this graph, not graph, but this picture for like an updated picture for 2023, but it's probably likely much higher now. So a new house is $318,000 dollars. An average income is $56,000. A new car is $33,000. Minimum wage is $9 an hour. And you see the relationship, right? You have to, back then you could buy like 3 cars per year, and now you can buy 1 car per year, basically. Back then you had to work 3 years to buy a house, and now you have to work 6 years to buy a house. So you see what inflation does. You have to work more and more to buy the same goods. But why is that? Because technological improvements, they should make things cheaper. They should create deflation, not inflation. You should be able to buy more goods than less. But the governments, they don't understand that. They say if you, the governments, their thinking comes from Keynes. And remember, Keynes is the guy who came up with the idea of creating a global central bank. The idea behind Keynes is that if there's no inflation, if we don't print more money, then people are less inclined to spend money, right? If the money becomes worth more, then you save more. But if you save more, you have to spend, you can spend less. And their thinking of Keynes is if the demand for goods and services decreases because people save more, then the economy collapses. And producers, they don't produce because there's no demand. So it's a vicious cycle of thinking that says printing more money increases more spending, aggregate spending. More spending increases more production. More production increases new jobs increases more money. But let's back off a minute. This is the thinking of Keynes. And if you don't know the alternative, you would agree with that. And that's also what school teaches us. In school, the economic teachers, they say 2% inflation is good. Like this target, this arbitrary target is good, and it creates a good economy. Sorry, guys. Look, my cat didn't notice. So let's back off. What is the alternative to that? The alternative to this economic thinking is the Austrian economic thinking. That's what it's called. And the guy who leads that economic thinking, his name was Hayek. And Hayek wasn't so politically connected like Keynes, so that's why his economic theories didn't trickle down into government. But Hayek's thinking was that he agrees with Keynes that consumption is what drives economies. Okay, maybe people will burn me for that statement, but let's stick with it. Consumption drives economic consumption drives economic output. He basically says that when the money is not debased and people are more inclined to save, that with the total amount of savings, people become more productive. Why? Because when the amount of saving increases, the total amount of money increases that's available for producers to borrow. And because there's more money, the interest rates for the loans goes down. And when the interest rates are low, producers will borrow more to invest in more facilities, but in productive facilities. And at the end of the day, he says that when the money is not debased, the total consumption increases. And to highlight what I mean by that, let's put it this way. You work your job, right? You earn your $50,000, and you want to go on vacation. You have $5,000 now to go on vacation. You can spend that money, or you can go on vacation on an average vacation, or you can save that money and invest that money. And in the future, that $5,000, they might be worth $10,000. And now you can do double the amount of vacationing. So basically the thinking is that when you become more productive, when you save, your total consumption at the end increases. And there's so many studies that highlight this fact, but they are buried. They're buried under this Keynes thinking, this economic thinking of printing money increases economic output. And you can see that this global experiment that we're having now since 50 years, what it's producing slave labor where people have to work more and more to get the same goods. It's producing a society that values short-term thinking and cheap products. For example, fast fashion, right? This is a product of this fiat system. You wouldn't have fast fashion if money was worth more, because people would then purchase more quality goods and all that. But this is a topic for a different thing. I just wanted to know, I wanted you to realize that this 50-year experiment since 1971 that we're having now, it has devastating consequences on society. Look, here's a website called What the Fuck Happened in 1971. And I will not show you all the charts because look, it's huge. It's like you can look 1 hour at the different charts. But it basically highlights what went wrong in 1971. Like when the printing of money began, the dollarization of the printing of the dollar began. And what it boils down to is that while productivity increases, the income, it doesn't increase the same amount. So the prices of goods and services, they rise, but the inflation is not adjusted accordingly in your compensation. So at the end of the day, you can buy less and less stuff. I'm speaking too much. And I hope you're still with me. So all around the world, we're using different currencies. The world reserve currency is the US dollar. But again, the charts here are not loading, which is not good. But I wanted to show you a chart that highlights that the average lifespan of a currency is 24 years. So all around the world, in the last 50 years, governments used more than 150 different currencies, and they all failed within 24 years on average. The US dollar, it still exists, but as you saw in a chart earlier, it got pretty much hyperinflated, right? You lost 98% of your value. And here's an article from someone that I find very smart and that I want you to check out. His name is Robert Breloff. He has this amazing article about that the whole system is a slave system. And what I want to show you is he made the analogy that the central bank is a slave master and that the printing of money, look, this is $1 trillion, right? This is the amount of money that the US government printed. And this is 2017 now. Now it's like 31 trillion. And it's increasing like every month it's increasing. So this article in Robert Breloff, he basically compares the central bank system with a slave system. And he made the calculation that, let me find that real quick. Yes, look good here. Stealing an average of 7.6% working hours per year since 1981, and 7.6% refers to the inflation rate, which is the real inflation rate, because CPI data, which the governments put out, is not real. It's fake because they change the metrics and how they calculate the inflation data all the time. So stealing an average of 7.6% working hours per year since 1981, bureaucrats at the Federal Reserve, have managed to scalp nearly 1 trillion hours off the backs of hardworking people. Assuming each person works an average of 2,000 hours per year, this is equivalent to enslaving 11.7 million people for 40 years straight. Time stolen by the Fed since 1981 is 341% more per year than the transatlantic slave trade. With 23.4 billion hours stolen annually, the Federal Reserve could, in theory, build 2.3 Great Pyramids each year. In terms of absolute human time stolen per year, fiat currency is the largest pyramid scheme and institutional slavery in human history. And I like that analogy a lot, because that's what it is. In ancient Egypt, the pharaohs, the masters, right, they built these pyramids on the backs of like thousands of slaves. And the same is happening now. The whole system is based on us working and paying the taxes and keeping that system alive. And we're secretly taxed through inflation. And they are the pharaohs of the modern age. They're the masters and we're the slaves. And like agri-beats, remember that story. That's why I told you to keep that glass bead story in the back of your head. The problem is, that's what everything boils down to. The problem is that the governments in the world, they can create money without energy. They can they can create money out of thin air. They have done it in history. They will do it, and they're doing it right now. And every time that a country gets hyperinflated, the people get wiped out. And who benefits? Look, this is, for example, in 2008, the story, right, of how 2007 and 2008 happened. The bankers, right, they created these derivatives that had no underlying value, and the whole system blew up. And they made their fees, right? They made their billions of dollars. The bankers made the billions of dollars. But when the whole system collapsed, the government, it stepped in and it said, oh, Goldman Sachs, oh, JP Morgan, oh, Wells Fargo, whatnot, all the banks, Lehman Brothers, right? Not Lehman Brothers, right? They failed, but the others, they just bailed everyone out. They said, look, guys, you made fraud, you earned billions of dollars, but now that the fraud is being covered up, we're going to socialize all your losses. So we privatize your gains, but we socialize the losses. And the government, they basically printed $700 billion and they just gave it to the banks. And they said they're too big to fail. But what incentivizes that? That only incentivizes more greed and more corruption, because suddenly the bankers, they realize that whatever they do, they can just continue doing it and they won't go to jail, and the fines that they have to pay is close to nothing. Like, you earn $1 billion from fees or from derivative products, but when that comes up, you only pay like $1 million in fines. So that incentivizes more speculation. That was $700 billion. And today, the US government, they just approved a new spending bill. Again, it's not loading. I'm sorry for that. But yeah, the government, it approved a $1.3 trillion spending bill. It's like a bazooka. During COVID, they did the same. I don't know. I think it was a little bit less. It was like $1 trillion. It was like a mini bazooka. And now came the big bazooka. It's like $2.5 trillion that they printed now during the last 2 years. That's like 3 times 2008. 3 times or more, you know. I'm bad in heads calculating. But you see they're printing money, okay? And the dollar is getting worth less. It's getting stronger than other currencies, however, right? You're seeing other currencies being devalued fast in a rate faster than the US dollar, but nonetheless, the dollar is decreasing in value very fast. And I'm gonna tell you, in 5 years, you can buy a fraction of the goods and services with the dollar amount that you can do now. And that's basically because the government print money. And another thing that you need to know is that this fiat system, this inflation that this fiat system creates, it creates the financial industry. The financial industry is an unproductive industry. They don't do anything productive. They don't create value to society. They just, and listen to this from the bottom of my heart, because when I was younger, when I was like 5, 6 years old, my dream was to be an investment banker and all that. But I quickly came to the realization that investment bankers, all the bankers who sit in London, in New York, in Hong Kong, right? All they do is shift numbers around. They don't do anything productive. They don't create innovation, and the only job of the financial industry is to get on top of that inflation. It's to get poorer in a rate that is slower than everyone else, because they know that they are getting poorer, right? The average return of the S&P 500 is what, 8%, something like that, and the inflation is 7%, as we know. You're just getting, you have like a 1% difference that you make. And while everyone gets poorer because they don't speculate and because they don't invest, you get poorer less fast. So that's basically the whole point of the financial industry. And yeah, they're all rent seekers, right? Okay, I've talked enough now about central banks. I think I talked enough about the current financial system and how it absolutely fleeces you because you're not inclined to save. You need to speculate in the market to come on top of inflation. Yeah, and you're getting poor, basically. And yes, the people with a higher IQ, the people with high education, the people who go into finance, they have their opportunity to get on top of inflation, but most of the average person can't do that. And it's about the average person because they are getting fleeced. So let's talk now about Bitcoin, because I think now you made the connections between the properties of Bitcoin and on the other side, the fiat system that is created by the central banks. Bitcoin, let's switch now. Bitcoin was created, as you know, by Satoshi Nakamoto. Satoshi is a person, a group of people a man, a woman, it can be anyone. We don't know. And that's good. That way it's good because there's no one who's in control of it. Satoshi, he released the Bitcoin white paper shortly after the 2008 bailouts. With a reason, right? He was furious, he was angry. He saw the headlines of the bailouts, right? The taxpayers were basically paying the bankers who committed all the fraud. So he released that, and 1 year later, the Bitcoin network, or not 1 year, like shortly after the Bitcoin network launched. And let's go back now to the properties of Bitcoin and why Bitcoin is the antithesis of fiat currency and the whole system. Here's a great article from Gigi where he explains that Bitcoin is time. It's very technical, I love it, but we're not gonna talk a lot about why Bitcoin is time. I'm just showing you this because you have to understand again what money is, because money can be anything. Money is what people give value to. And money can have two versions. It can be a ledger and it can be a token. What do I mean by that? A token, right, is a physical item. Like you give it to one person and they use that to purchase something. Let's say I have 2 coins, right? And you have a chicken that I want to buy. I give you 1 coin, you give me the chicken. Now I have 1 chicken and 1 coin, and you have 1 coin, right? I purchased that from you. This is a token, right? It's a real physical good. The second thing that can be used as a transaction method is a ledger. That's basically a list of where we insert what someone owes whom. So for the same example, let's say I have 2 units of money and you have a chicken. Then we're gonna write in the ledger, okay, Constantin sent Johannes a token. Now both have 1 token, but Constantin has a chicken. And this is a ledger. Both types have pros and cons. A token, for example, it has the pro that we cannot double spend. What do I mean by that? Double spend is when I have 2 tokens and I give you 1 token and then I say I have a token again. We just created 3 tokens, but there were only 2 tokens, right? But now we have 3 tokens. And but in the physical world with tokens, that's not possible because when I give you 1 of my tokens, I only have 1, right? You cannot just create it out of thin air. That's the pro of tokens. On the negative side, for example, of the ledger is that you can double spend because the people who is keeping track of the list, he can just write it in. He can erase the last ledger entry and they can say, okay, Constantin gave him 1 token, but he still has 2 tokens, 3 tokens at all, but there were only 2. This is double spending. This is the con of a ledger. Okay, what's the pro of a ledger? The pro of a ledger is, first of all, it's easier, right? Gold coins were heavy, right? So ledgers are easier to do. And also in the digital realm, like we have now in the internet, you cannot physically give someone a token, correct? So everything is a ledger entry in a digital world. That's the pro of a ledger. It can be used in the digital world, but it's centralized, right? I have to trust a central authority, a banker, a bank, anyone, to be correct, to not double spend, to really insert the transactions as they really are. And that ledger system was abused throughout history many times. And in the digital world also. And that's what Bitcoin solves. For the first time in history, we have a ledger, a decentralized ledger that cannot be changed. You don't have to trust anyone to send a transaction from one person to the other through digitally. I can send you from the other side of the world money, a value, without having to trust a counterparty, a bank, to correctly enter this ledger entry. And this is amazing. This is profound. This is 40 years of cryptographic achievements. Satoshi combined 40 years of cryptographic achievements into this innovation, into this cryptographic innovation that you don't need to trust someone when sending value. The second thing is that what Bitcoin did is proof of work, right? It requires energy to create Bitcoin. You can't just print Bitcoins into existence by pressing a button. The miners, they have to... In a separate video, I'm gonna actually explain the proof of work system, the way I got it explained and when I firstly understood it. But I'm not gonna do this now. But basically, proof of work, right? Miners, when they create Bitcoins, they have to invest money, they have to invest energy, they have to buy equipment, and it requires electricity to verify blocks and to receive the reward for verifying it. And that's why Bitcoin is the superior monetary asset that we have. It has a fixed supply. No one can create more than 21 million. It requires energy to create, right? You cannot print it out of thin air. You can send value for nearly free from anywhere in the world, and you don't have to trust a bank to make that. Because it's decentralized, no one can freeze the transaction. Like we saw in Russia now, or like we saw in Canada, they can't freeze your accounts, they can't freeze your wallet. There's no one in charge of the Bitcoin network to do all these things. So Bitcoin is a superior tool for saving money because the demand increases, right? Because governments just inflate the currencies and people realize that, so they try to save in something that holds the value, and the value is being held. And yeah, it's a store of value. It's the best kind of store of value that humanity has ever found. And I know this is very briefly and shortly, and I want to explain Bitcoin and the worth of Bitcoin more in a separate video. But today is more about realizing that the world that we are living in is not what it seems. And that the fiat system is fleecing everyone. And you need to begin understanding that. And you need to understand that Bitcoin is an alternative to this system. And it's a free alternative. There's no one that forces you to use Bitcoin. It's completely up to the free market to decide. Like, you can decide for yourself if you want to use Bitcoin. No one forces you. Bitcoiners and the Bitcoin community, they only want to show you this path. Like, here is the train, you can jump on, or you can stay behind if you want to. And that's why it's a peaceful revolution, and it will disrupt central banking. And the price will reflect that. And now, coming to the end of this live stream, I know it was long, but 2023 will be one of the best years to purchase Bitcoin, to enter the market, right? The Federal Reserve, they're raising rates. They're taking liquidity out of the market. So nearly every asset in the world is falling. And the same goes with Bitcoin. But they can't do that forever because the system requires them to create more money. Otherwise, the system collapses. And that time will come. It's just a matter of when. And when that time comes, the assets will all jump in price. Real estate, stocks, Bitcoin. And here's my point that I want to make is Bitcoin is the fastest horse in the race. If you save your money in an ETF and you get your 8%, you're just like this going above inflation. You need a vehicle that is still small compared to what it can be. And that's what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin has a market cap of $300 billion. This is tiny. The global market for money is $300 trillion. So that's a 1000x of now. So you see, you're still early. And think about this. How many of your friends, how many of your people that you know own Bitcoin or understand it? I'm in Bitcoin like 4 years now, but I still only know like a handful of people who own Bitcoin or who understand it. So we're still very early. And if even our generation isn't yet known about, who doesn't know about the technology and about fiat systems and central bank tyranny and all that, then the boomer generation, they have no clue. Okay, I think I'm gonna now slowly but surely finish this live stream. There's one thing I want to say is that in a future live stream, in a future video, we'll go through Bitcoin more in depth. We're going to talk about Bitcoin and proof of work and how the algorithm works, how mining works, more in depth. We're gonna do that. But that was not the point of today's video. Two things I want to quickly share with you is because people say that Bitcoin can't be used for small value transactions. Look at this. This is in Brazil. People are using the Lightning Network to pay. And in El Salvador, you can buy anything, right? They have it as legal tender. In South Africa, you can go to any grocery store. You can buy anything with Bitcoin. Even in Africa, let me find that. Look at this. This is like nowhere in Africa. Well, there. Look, the guy goes there. He wants to buy some stuff with Bitcoin. Right, and this can't cost much. And if you would pay $1 in transaction fee, it would make sense. So with the Lightning Network, you don't pay these high transaction fees. You pay almost zero. Like, look how fast this is. Look, boom, gone. It's also going to disrupt the whole remittance market. If you don't know what remittance are, it's like sending money abroad. Especially in poorer countries, people have to utilize Western Union to send money to their family. Right? They come work in Europe, for example, or they go work in the United States, and then they send money back home. But Western Union charges like $50 for, I don't know, a $300 transaction, like 20% or something like that, some crazy amount. And this takes real money away from people. And with Bitcoin, they don't pay that. They can send money free, permissionless, without fees to their family. And this whole remittance market is worth $300 billion per year. Western Union, TransferWise, all these services. Also, the whole Forex market, right? Exchanging one currency for the other. Bitcoin is going to disrupt all that. But that's also a topic for another video. the last thing I want to show you is quickly like environment, right? People say Bitcoin is bad for an environment, right? Miners, they use electricity to mine, and if they mine that in Austria, for example, or in Germany or anywhere, it's too expensive. The electricity is too expensive to mine. They need to go to Kazakhstan, to Argentina, to places where they have renewable sources, because those renewable sources are cheap. Or they go to Texas and they use gas flares from the oil production to heat, like to mine, basically, right? They use renewable energy, basically, or they use energy that is ubiquitous. And Bitcoin can actually become one of the biggest drivers of renewable energies, because let's say I'm a developer of wind or solar systems, and I have to decide where I'm gonna build a new plant. Most of the locations, they're not profitable for me, because I can't deliver 100% of the power that I generate into the system. It's like only 30%. So what do I do with 70% of the electricity that I generate? Like, it goes into air, it doesn't do anything. So most of the locations are not profitable, and that's why there's not so much solar and wind. But with Bitcoin mining, they can use that 70% that they produce anyway, right? And invest and mine Bitcoins with that and create that margin. So it becomes more profitable. And that's why Bitcoin mining actually improves the usability of renewable energy. And you can see here, look, powering a rural Kenya village and securing the Bitcoin network with excess hydropower, all while lowering rates to 2,000 people. So please forget, for the love of God, forget the argument that Bitcoin is bad for the environment. It's not. And we're gonna also discuss this in a new video. We talked a long time now, and I'm gonna make quits here now. I hope you enjoyed. Please give me feedback, guys. I know this is the first time I'm doing this, and it wasn't perfect, I know that, and it was too long, or could have made the information more precise, but I wanted to start, right? If you don't start, you're never gonna do it. And please give me feedback so I can improve. Okay, that's it, guys. Thank you so much, and yeah, enjoy the Sunday. Bye bye.